Ms. Dwyer, you may proceed to closing arguments.
Thank you, Your Honor. This is Officer Sean Bolton, ladies and gentlemen. He served his country in the Marines, in the U.S., in Iraq, and in Africa. And for the last 6 years of his life, he served us, the citizens of Memphis Shelby County, as a police officer here in our town. He was loved by the people in his community. In fact, as Crutchfield told you, he was our neighborhood police officer. And we liked it. And I saw him out on the street and he waved. And we appreciated what he did for us in our community. On August the 1st, 2015, Officer Bolton took this drive that you ladies and gentlemen of the jury took. He turned onto Summer Lane, past Miss Crutchfield's house, pulled up here, and saw a vehicle that was parked left side of the curb. That's where he died. Where Marquise lived, where Tagar Jones and Tiffany and his girlfriend lived. Saw a vehicle left side of the curb and was concerned. What's going on? Just like Mr. Jones and Crystal, his girlfriend, side Marquise. Why is that car left side of the curb? So he turned the spotlight on it. It wasn't a traffic stop, ladies and gentlemen. This car was already stopped. He turned the spotlight on it. What's going on? Because it's a quiet little neighborhood. And the driver jumped out and ran down the street. Well, it's reasonable to assume, ladies and gentlemen, that the driver of that car had done something wrong. And we can Monday morning quarterback. But the bottom line is, we knew that the defendant was in that vehicle, a convicted felon with prior crimes of violence, engaged in a drug transaction. Officer Bolton didn't know that. What he knew was somebody had jumped out of that car and ran, and they probably did something wrong. What he didn't know was what was going on with the passenger in the car. Wasn't involved in anything wrong. Maybe that passenger was a victim of a crime, so that passenger might need help. Maybe that passenger was injured. Maybe that passenger needed some sort of assistance. At that point, ladies and gentlemen, Officer Bolton couldn't walk away. His job was to make sure the person in the vehicle was okay. That's what he's paid to do. That's what we paid him to do, to protect us as citizens. Something doesn't look right, you check on it. And you check on that person to see if they're okay. And he did. And we know when he got around to the front, to the side of that vehicle and looked in, we knew he could see drugs in that car. And we knew that he assumed, like the other officer did, that there was a drug transaction going on. But all these things that we know about the defendant today, Officer Bolton didn't know. So we turned on Summer Lane. This is 4871. Marquise Wright was standing out in the front yard of his house. About right here, he told us, kind of by the tree in the driveway. And if you remember from viewing it this morning, it's really not that far. The distance is not that far. He told you he had a really good view of it, and he did. And he stood out there smoking a cigarette. He said the light came on, and he could see all of that. And it was light out there, he said. There was certainly enough light for him to see. He could see into the red Mercedes. He could see the lights shining down on the street. And he had a good view of what was happening. He saw little Dave run off. He knew it was little Dave. He said that when the officer got the guy out of the car, the defendant, there was a tussle. He said he saw the defendant push the officer back and then start firing at him. Didn't hear the officer say anything. And then he saw the defendant firing multiple shots at Officer Bolton. We now know that he fired 11 shots. He told you the police officer never got his gun out, never even acted like he was going to get his gun out before the defendant started shooting at him. And again, he told you there was lighting, and you saw it this morning, the street light there. There were lights on the houses. And he told you, this is the dude that shot the police officer and cited Marquise Wright, 8:02 the following morning. David Carter Lemire told you he'd known the defendant since childhood. He said that night he went over to the Montgomery Park Apartments, saw the defendant, and the defendant asked to go with him to sell drugs. He said when he saw the spotlight come on, he got out of the car and ran. And he said he's seen Tremaine with a gun before. He knows Tremaine Wilbourn to carry a gun. And when he found out what happened, he called this officer, came out and told the police what he knew about it, because he didn't want to be part of any of this. And he also gave a statement saying Tremaine was in my car and he must have been the shooter of the officer. And he identified the defendant, Tremaine Wilbourn. We know that the defendant is a convicted felon because he stipulated to it. He agreed to it. The stipulation which the judge read to you and is signed by Mr. Wilbourn here. On August 1st, 2015, the defendant, Tremaine Wilbourn, had previously been convicted of felonies involving the use or attempted use of violence. Tremaine Wilbourn was made aware of and acknowledged prior to August 1st, 2015, that given his previous convictions, it was a crime for him to own, possess, or handle a firearm. The one stamp was a dispatch operator that night. Badge operating stamps. Rough night from his stamps. She told you about getting the call that she knew was Officer Bolton, the cut-off call that she knew something was wrong, and she thought he might have been fighting with somebody because it happens, but they couldn't raise it and she couldn't locate it. Miss Crutchfield, she told you he was our neighborhood policeman. She said when she heard those shots, she could hear glass shattering in front of her house. And like you saw, that's a quiet little neighborhood. She told you her little grandbaby was in the front room of the house where all that glass was breaking and crawled on her hands and knees into the den of the house. She said she went outside and she saw Officer Bolton, and she said he was laying face down in her neighbor's driveway with his hands over his face. She said she and other people tried to call 911 and couldn't get through. She told you the police car was running and the door on the Mercedes was open. Mr. Jones told you he was outside with his girlfriend, Christopher Freeman. And he sees the police light shine on the car, and he said, just like Ms. Freeman told you, it was strange. We noticed that car. We wondered what was going on. He said he saw somebody run down the street. He now knows it's little Dave, but he saw somebody running down the street when the lights came on. He said he heard scuffling like shoes scuffling. He heard the defendant. He said he then heard one shot. Because the shot that Marquise Wright heard, he pushed him off. And he heard multiple repeating shots. He said he knew it was coming from just one gun. And he said he saw the defendant firing up, walking backwards, firing his gun as he backed away from Sean Bolton into the ground. He said he tried to call 911 too, and he was there when Chris got on the radio. He called on the officer's radio. He said the officer's gun was still in his holster, and the officer was face down with his hands over his face. Christopher Lanier said Marquise, his nephew, came running in the house saying somebody shot the police, somebody shot the police. Mr. Lanier said, thought he was lying, you know. He said, so I went outside to show Marquise he was wrong, and I walked around the car, and when I got to the back of the police officer's car and looked across, down in the neighbor's driveway across the street, I saw the police officer laying there, face down, on the sidewalk, near the back of the police car. He told you his gun was still in his holster. He told you his handcuffs were still in his holster. And he said he got on the officer's radio and he called for help when they couldn't get through to 911. He said the burgundy Mercedes belonged to Little Dave's girlfriend. He said both front doors of that vehicle were open. Sergeant Hurst went out there later. Mr. Lanier called him and had found an additional 11th shell casing, fired bullet shell casing on the street.
Fort Hilton. Y'all got them hands down. It's 72 calls from the way, man. Hurry up, you bleeding like bad, man. Please hurry up.
Officer Kevin Bobo told you that he rushed over there immediately. As soon as he figured out where he was, he started to the Cottonwood Apartments, but then he heard the call, heard the address, and knew where to go. He heard Sean keying up, and he just knew something was wrong. He was the first one on the scene, and he was calling out Sean's name. And if you remember, Ms. Freeman said, when he got there, he said, "Man, what are you doing down here?" And he turned Sean over. He said his gun was still holstered, and his handcuffs were still in his belt. He said he and the other officers opened up his shirt, pulled his vest off, and started doing CPR. But they couldn't, because of the injury, the air wouldn't go in because this part was missing, so he told you. But they tried to put a breathing machine on him, it didn't work. They waited for the ambulance, and they did chest compressions until they could get the ambulance got there. Officer Jacobo Boyd, also there, arrived right after Officer Bobo. Told you he served in the Marines with Sean, and they had been good friends for a long time. Told you he was the person that convinced Sean to become a police officer. He said when he got there, he and Kevin pulled that vest off, and they started chest compressions. And he told you that when they couldn't get the breathing apparatus to work and they couldn't breathe for Sean, he went to his police car and got gloves, rubber gloves, so that it could hold the side of his face together, so that they could try to breathe for Sean. He told you the drivers, if you remember the driver's door of the Mercedes being open. He told you the police car door was open. He assisted with CPR. Tremaine Simpson was going to work a second shift with Sean Bolton that night. The police department was kind of needed some extra work. They were going to work a second shift together, and he had just seen him at a previous call. When he got there, the officers were working on Sean. He said there were officers there taking turns doing chest compressions. He said he walked over to the red Mercedes, because at that point there was nothing that he could do, and he looked in the window, and he could see the scales and the marijuana sitting on the center console. He could see baggies of marijuana in there, and he figured what had happened. He said both driver and passenger doors of that vehicle, the red Mercedes, were open. You next heard from Walt Cleveland. Walt Cleveland is a cell phone forensics expert, and he told you that he came to the scene that night on Summer Lane and retrieved two cell phones, the defendant's and Officer Bolton's. He told you he dumped both of those phones, and I don't know how they do it. They plug it into the machine and something happens. But he was able to identify the owner of the defendant's phone. The owner of that gray phone is belonging to Tremaine Wilbourn. The other phone he was able to identify as Sean Bolton's phone. We know that the defendant left 4871 Summer Lane, where he shot Officer Bolton 11 times. We know he went to 3035 Clearbrook. Google Maps tells us that it's a little more than a half a mile, a 12-minute walk if you're taking the streets. We don't know how the defendant got there. But we know he arrived sometime shortly before 9:38 at Desperate Ivory's house. Desperate Ivory told you he was coming home from the Red Box that night. And he said that the defendant put a gun to his head and took his car and said, "I just shot the police. I need your car." Call 911 at 9:38. And he identified the defendant. This is the guy that carjacked me in my driveway at 3035 Clearbrook on August the 1st of 2015. He approached me and said, "I just shot a police officer and I need your car." Mr. Ivory said, "I gave him the keys." We know that vehicle ended up here in front of the defendant's girlfriend's apartment at the Briar Park Apartments. At the Ventry Apartments, I'm sorry. The officers found it a couple of days later. There it is. It had that distinctive windshield wiper thing on the windshield of it. And we could see it as it drove into the apartment complex, if you recall. There's his girlfriend. And the video of the vehicle pulling in is 9:50-58. So some 10, 15 minutes after he carjacked and put a gun in Desert Ivory's head, he's pulling into the Ventry Apartments. Josh Grimes told you that he too had made a call earlier that evening with Sean Bolton. That he moved Sean's police car to let the ambulance in, so we know that the police car was pulled forward a couple of feet in order to allow the ambulance to get in. He said that he didn't realize at first that was Sean Bolton's car until he saw the Popeyes chicken in the car, and he knew that Sean had been eating Popeyes. He told his rookie partner to take Sean's gun belt and ride to the med with Sean because he was worried about his rookie partner getting shot. You heard from CSI Officer Gary, who took photographs, prepared evidence, lifted fingerprints, collected evidence, and inventoried Desert Ivory's car. Photograph from the night that this happened. It's a driveway where Officer Bolton was. The items of evidence: Officer Bolton's phone, the 11 shell casings, or 10, I'm sorry, during that night, lined up through here. As you can see, it's a struggle that took place fairly well right in here. Ten shell casings. I didn't do pictures of all of them. Sean Bolton's notepad and phone. Bulletproof vest. Bullet in the mailbox. Collected items of evidence. He collected marijuana from the car. He collected the scales of the marijuana. He collected this snack can, which is the drink can that Nate Gaffright lifted the fingerprint off of. One of the 4 that belonged to the defendant. Officer Coburn inventoried Sean Bolton's car. He inventoried the red Mercedes. He collected DNA swabs on the red Mercedes, collected fingerprints on the red Mercedes, and collected even more bags of marijuana out of the car. Popeye's chicken. It was in this police car. It's the red Mercedes. Driver's license and other things belonging to David O'Meara. Fingerprints that he lifted. Nathan Gaffright, expert fingerprint examiner, he matched fingerprints found on the snack can inside and on the inside of the vehicle to the defendant, Tremaine Wilbourn. Andrew Hurst went back out there after Christopher Lanier called him and told him that he had found one more shell casing. He recovered it, and that 11th shell casing also came out of the defendant's gun. Sir Sanders went to the Met and collected Sean Bolton's clothing and stirred his revolver in his belt. Sean Bolton's gun was not fired that night. He said he collected all the bullets and counted them. There they are. Donna Nelson told you that the defendant's phone, Tremaine Wilbourn's phone, Bolton's phone had Sean Bolton's DNA. The car had very limited information. Maybe because people don't shed, maybe because the defendant wiped it down, we don't know. But there was no DNA in it. We heard from Marshal Owen Woods. He told you that they searched for the defendant for 3 days. They locked this city down, ladies and gentlemen. The marshal's office went to every person the defendant knew, every family member, and they were closing in on him fast. So, on August the 3rd, in the afternoon, when he was getting ready to get caught, he surrendered. He had absolutely no injuries on him whatsoever. Dr. Ross told you that Sean Bolton, by contrast, had 8 gunshot wounds. The first one was pretty close to his face because there was stippling. The second entered on his arm and traveled up his arm, and the bullet was recovered inside his arm. The third was a hip injury that exited through his thigh in the front. The fourth entered the back of his right thigh and exited his knees. He was probably on the ground at the time. 5 was a fatal side chest injury that exited near his navel. 6 was fatal. It went up the back of his leg and is consistent with him being face down on the ground and the defendant backing up, firing at him. But there's gunshot residue on that one. So it was 4 feet on that one. 7, however, had a similar trajectory to 6, but there's no gunshot residue on it. And the significance of that is that it corroborates what O'Tagar Jones told you he saw, which was the defendant backing up, firing at Officer Bolton when he was face down on the ground. Because when you get past 4 feet, there's not gunshot residue. Number 8 entered his hand and broke the bones in his hand. He told you he and Servinia Braswell, the firearms identification expert, told you that with his vest on the inside and the shirt over it, the defendant is clearly firing around the bulletproof vest. It's a stippling that you. Dr. Ross told you about this evidence of a close wound. These are the 2 that were clearly fired when he was lying down. His hand injury. Servinia Braswell examined the bullets taken by the medical examiner's office out of Officer Bolton. She told you every one of those bullets came out of the defendant's gun. All of those 11 shell casings came out of the defendant's gun. We don't know where it is, but they all match the same gun, and they weren't done by, it wasn't done by Officer Bolton. None of those casings, none of those bullets came from Officer Bolton's gun. She told you that Sean Bolton's gun was never fired, and all the entrance wounds except 7 were within 4 feet. Jacobo Boyd, Officer Boyd, told you that when he arrived at the scene, he knew that Sean had never even tried to get his gun out because it was locked down. And she showed you how the top hood of that gun locks down. And you have to, even before you can even think about getting the gun out, you have to lift the hood up and then push the trigger and then pull it out. The hood was never even moved. So Jacobo Boyd knew his friend never even tried to go for a gun, never even thought about that. When you get back in the jury room, ladies and gentlemen, part of your job is to judge credibility. Part of your job is to determine who benefits if you believe a lie. I would ask you if they do any of these witnesses that you've heard from this week anything if you believe a lie. And then I'd ask you to think about who might. Flight. The judge instructed you that flight is something that you can consider as evidence of guilt. And the evidence is that the defendant hid for 3 days. As the marshal's office closed down. The defendant has stipulated that he is a convicted felon in possession of a firearm. He has 2 prior felony convictions for crimes of violence. He possessed a firearm that night, even after having been told that he could never even touch one. He armed himself, and he was known to go armed, according to his friend David Logan. He took a vehicle from Desperate Ivory by force or intimidation, which he left at his girlfriend's house. And he told Desperate Ivory, "I just shot the police. Give me your car." Thank God Desperate Ivory gave it to him, right? He committed a carjacking. He used a firearm to do it. Those are the elements of employing a firearm during a dangerous felony. First-degree murder. But the defendant killed Sean Bolton. We know he did. Every bit of evidence tells us he did. Marquise Wright told you he did. David Carter Lanier told you he did. His fingerprint evidence left on the scene told you he did. And his DNA left on the scene tells you that he killed Officer Sean Bolton. Was it intentional? Was it premeditated? Yes, it was. And some of the things that you can consider in deciding that is the thought. I'm going to do this. This defendant did not want to go back to prison, ladies and gentlemen. And at some point after he got out of the car and was headed toward the squad car, he decided, I want to do whatever it takes to get out of this. And that thought is premeditation, ladies and gentlemen. Procuring a weapon after you've been told that you cannot have one legally because of your prior crimes of violence. You can consider that as evidence of premeditation. You can consider the fact that the officer never even removed the safety off his weapon as evidence of premeditation. You can consider the cruelty of this offense, ladies and gentlemen. Shooting somebody in the face. Shooting somebody when they're on the ground, face down, holding their face, which is what Dr. Ross told you is a very painful injury, produces a lot of blood. All of those things are things you can consider as evidence of intent and premeditation. You can consider the fact that he shot 11 times at Officer Bolton. And he didn't faint. You can consider the fact that after he killed Officer Bolton, he carjacked somebody. He's a little out of breath. Mr. Ivory said, you can consider the fact that he got rid of the weapon as evidence of premeditation, ladies and gentlemen. First-degree murder, carjacking, employing a firearm, convicted felon in possession of a firearm. I would submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the defendant has been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of all of those crimes. And I would ask you to find